Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? I am Matt O'Leary, joined as always by Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
Doing great, man. Free agency kind of quieting down, so now it's time to start focusing up on the upcoming 2024 NFL Draft for Giants fans and Jets fans as well. I'm really excited about it. It's been a lot of changes all throughout the NFL, and it's had pretty significant ramifications on the upcoming draft, and it's been one exciting offseason, so I'm excited to see where else it goes.
Absolutely. The focus can begin turning to the NFL draft. But since the last time we spoke, the New York Jets made a pretty big signing in going out there and adding Tyron Smith to their offensive line. And that also has impacts on the NFL draft. So we can get into that in this as well. But New York Jets go with the big swing at offensive tackle on a 1-year deal. Could be worth up to $20 million with incentives, but the base is closer to $6 million, which I think with Tyron's injury history, that is the wise way to go about it. But as someone who's watched a lot of Tyron Smith over the years, as he's been the anchor at left tackle for the Cowboys for a very, very long time, what kind of player do you think that the Jets are getting here with Smith?
They're getting an elite player. I mean, he's one of the best offensive tackles in football, even this past season. It's not like he didn't make the second team All-Pro, right? Like he's still playing at the top of his game, albeit just not playing as much anymore. He hasn't played in 16 games since 2015. Looking at his career history, it's like 13 game seasons are the norm for this guy. It's almost 13 games every single year. And then a couple of outliers where he only played in 2 games or 4 games or 11 games. So injuries for the last decade almost have plagued this guy's career, but even still, when he's on the field, one of the best offensive linemen in football, and you can't go wrong here if you're the Jets and you're getting an incentive-laden contract, something with kind of injury protection built into it. I mean, you are getting a tremendous talent here, and it's something that Jets fans should definitely be excited about. Hopefully, he plays enough to get excited about it, but if he's on the field for even 11 games, I think you have to be happy about it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. So when the news broke late on Friday night, was definitely excited about it, did a quick reaction video to it. But something the Jets, I think, absolutely need to have is a good contingency plan for Tyron Smith, because as you mentioned, there's no way around that. He is going to miss time this year. He hasn't played a full healthy season, going back now 9 years, which is a long time. But if he gives you, we'll say 10 to 13 games this year, do they have something to fall back on? Now, I think it's dependent on how they feel about Carter Warren, who is someone they drafted last year in the 4th round. He played a little bit of left and right tackle, probably was better at right tackle than he was left. There were some nice moments. There were some not so great moments. Some of the underlying numbers don't look great, but the offensive line as a whole was pretty terrible. So that kind of has a little bit of a factor in it. But I'm curious to see if they add maybe either a veteran swing tackle or just another body to this offensive line at the tackle spot because of the injury history you have with Tyron Smith, and because, the tackle that they traded for last week and Morgan Moses, he's someone who normally stays pretty healthy, but he's 33 years old now as well. So I think you need to make sure you have some good insurance behind those guys.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there needs to be some sort of depth there. Somebody, ideally, I would think somebody who can play on both sides of the line, just in case of anything. You mentioned it, like Morgan Moses, he's healthy. He's usually on the field, but he is getting up there in age. So maybe injuries start to nag at him and he starts to miss time with injuries at this stage in his career. It's totally possible. So I think that you would want somebody with a little bit of flexibility to play on both sides. I don't know who's available in free agency still, but I think that would make sense. And first and foremost, you just need insurance for the fact that Tyron Smith hasn't played a full season since 2016. So it's been a long time for him. Injuries are constantly nagging at him and taking him off of the field. So it's something that you do have to plan for, but maybe it's something that you plan for through the NFL draft. Maybe you go ahead. We'll talk about probably how this shifts the landscape for them in the first round, But I'll just say, maybe you go ahead and take a developmental prospect in the middle rounds here, and you hope that he could step in and make some spot starts for you if Tyron Smith missed time with any injury. So I think that's also an option. Maybe they don't have to do it the veteran free agency route. Maybe they could find someone developmental in the middle rounds.
That's kind of where I wanted to take this conversation next, is how much this opens things up for the New York Jets in the first round, the addition of Tyron Smith. They go out and they they add a couple of tackles, one through a trade, one through free agency. They sign a guard as well as John Simpson. And now you're kind of in a spot where for months, Jets fans and, NFL draft analysts were pretty much penciling in best offensive tackle available to the Jets at pick number 10. And then you move forward from there. And now you don't necessarily have to go offensive line. I think there's still a world where they could go offensive line in the first round. One, because it's a good tackle class. If they like one of the offensive linemen, you could do that. And neither Morgan Moses or Tyron Smith are your long-term answers. So getting someone you feel comfortable with in this draft, if that's who you really like, that's one way to look at it. And then number two, the guys are going to miss time. If he ends up playing 20 to 25% of the snaps, hell, that's more than Will McDonald played for you last year, and it's at a valuable position in offensive tackle. But they don't have to. They could go wide receiver. They could take Brock Bowers. They could move down. I think what I'm most excited about with this Tyron Smith signing is just how many different options the Jets now have in the first round, and you're not locked into, you absolutely have to, no questions about it, take an offensive lineman. There's a lot you could do.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the signing, and really the other moves that the Jets made on the offensive line. They have the ultimate flexibility going into the NFL draft, because I think that this starting five that they have right now is good enough. You could go out into the 2024 season and put this starting five on the field and feel fine about it. It's better than probably what the Giants have, I would argue. So, and it's better than what the Giants have put out on the field for the last 7 years. So this is a fine starting five. Is it where you want it to be? Is it as exciting as maybe you wanted it to be? Maybe not, but it's a good starting five. And in the NFL, all you need is an average to above offensive line. Obviously, the best offenses, they thrive because they have elite offensive line play. Most teams don't. Most teams have bad offensive line play. So to get a solid starting five here with good players is good enough. And now it does open you up where in the NFL draft, yeah, you could still take an elite tackle here because of what we mentioned, injury history to guys like Tyron Smith. And maybe you don't do that. Maybe you trade down now and you could take a tackle prospect who's got a little bit more time to grow. Maybe an Amarius Mims out of Georgia. He hasn't played a whole lot in college. Maybe now he's an option. Or maybe someone like a Fontenot, who's guard tackle. We'll see where he plays in the NFL. Now you have the flexibility there. So there's just a lot of players that are now added to the big board for the Jets, in my opinion, because of this deal and really all the other deals that they made up front on the offensive line. And having flexibility going into the NFL draft is the ultimate goal of free agency. You want to set your team up so that you can do whatever you want in the draft, and you don't have to address certain and specific positions of need. So the Jets have done a really good job this offseason. I do have to commend them. I think it's been a really solid job in free agency. And like I said, opening up flexibility in the draft is the main priority of free agency, and they've done that. So I think that Jets fans have to be pretty happy about how this offseason has gone so far.
Yeah, I want to pull up a comment from our guy Johnny, who chimes in and says, trade back scenario, maybe with Jacksonville, get a second round pick, draft Fatanu, who you just mentioned, player that can play guard or tackle, get a second round weapon. What are your thoughts? I think Johnny watched my mock draft this morning, because that's exactly what I did pretty much. I moved back, drafted Fontenot, and then picked up Roman Wilson in the second round with the pick that I acquired in the move back. But I know you're a big draft guy. What's your take on Fontenot as a prospect?
I like him. I'm worried about him playing tackle because of his size. I know that he came into the NFL Combine and had some really long arms, so that kind of put some of those concerns to rest for a lot of people. Not as much for me. I still have some concern about it. I think that it's kind of like that debate that we've had a few times with prospects in the past, where it's like, they could probably be a good tackle, but they could probably step into the NFL from day one and be a really good guard. Which one would you rather have? Somebody who develops eventually into a good tackle, or someone who steps in as a good guard? And that's a big question mark. So, and I think that, with the Jets here now having some stability at tackle, maybe you do draft him to play guard in year one. And maybe after Tyron Smith retires or moves on, whatever, next year, then you move him to tackle. That's totally possible as well. So I like him. I think he's a good player. But, it would definitely be in a trade down scenario. I wouldn't take him at number 10, obviously.
No, I'm with you as well. I think if, the Jets plan on taking offensive linemen at 10, I would rather go Fashanu or Fuaga at that spot instead. But that's a good point to bring up too, because I feel like you can make a similar comparison to someone that the Jets already have in Elijah Vera Tucker, who was drafted. He played tackle in college, but many thought, hey, like this is a guy who could come in and play guard right away, has the ability to play tackle. He ends up doing both. Or Peter Skoronski last year. There was questions on whether he would be a tackle or a guard. He ends up in Tennessee and plays guard his first year in the league. So totally get that. I just think that the overall point that I want to make and put out there is just because they added Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, doesn't necessarily mean there's no shot they're taking offensive linemen. Yes, like they could obviously now pivot and go with a weapon, and I'd be good with that, or in a trade down or whatever. But there being options after this Tyron Smith signing is the main thing I think Jet fans need to take away from him.
Yeah, and it does set them up perfectly. Maybe they can go ahead and take a wide receiver. If one of those guys ends up falling, obviously the expectation is that the top 3 wide receivers will be off the board within the top probably 8 picks. But maybe someone does happen to slide to 10. And if that's the case, then you're the Jets. You're sitting there pretty and you're excited about that. And you're going to take an elite playmaker, if one of those guys does end up falling. But also, you could trade down. This is a loaded draft class with playmakers. Like there's a bunch of first round wide receivers who are going to go probably off the board between picks 23 and 32. So if you trade down into that range, maybe you take a guy like an Adonai Mitchell out of Texas or a Xavier Worthy out of Texas. You can go after one of those guys in the back half of the first round to upgrade your receiving core if that's the way you want to do it. So there's a lot of flexibility to be had here with the Jets pick. There's also a lot of flexibility in this draft class because it's not one of those classes where if you want a playmaker, you need to be picking at the top. Sure, you could get one of the top playmakers at the top of the draft order, but even towards the later end of that draft order, there's a lot of talent at that position. And I would also say the same thing of offensive tackle. Picking up near the top of the draft order, some really good tackles. Picking at the back end of it in the first round, still some good tackles and offensive line prospects. So it's a really deep draft class at the positions of need for both the Jets and the Giants, which I think is what makes it so exciting and really adds another layer to the flexibility that the Jets have opened themselves up with through free agency for the draft.
Absolutely. And that's, something that I'm really looking forward to. We'll see what the Jets do there. Obviously, another month to talk about it and debate the direction that the Jets are going to go. Want to get into our first Giants topic of the day. The Giants decide to pass up on the opportunity to trade for Justin Fields. Overall, just thoughts on the Giants not acquiring Justin Fields? Because I feel like that was a debate. People saw what he went for and it was a lot less than maybe the average person was going to think that he would get traded for. And it was like, hey, well, why can't the Giants do that? But what was your take on why they didn't go that direction?
Yeah, some Giants fans were upset that they didn't at least try to trade for Justin Fields. Personally, I think after they signed Drew Lock, it was pretty obvious that they wouldn't make this deal. Maybe after the NFL draft, if he hadn't been traded by then they would consider making a deal for Justin Fields if they didn't land a quarterback in the draft. But right now, this is a team that has Daniel Jones on their contract, now has Drew Lock on their contract, still technically has Tommy DeVito under contract, although we don't really factor him into the long-term plans. But then, if they go into this NFL draft, if they take another quarterback, put that under contract in the first round, then you definitely don't want Justin Fields on your roster, just adding to the mess. And even then, maybe they take somebody in the middle to late rounds as a developmental backup. Then what's the point in having Justin Fields under contract and on this roster? And I understand low cap hit. I believe it was only $3 million for Justin Fields going into the season. Very cheap. But even still, what if he goes in, plays well for you, has a really good year, the Giants make it, win a playoff game, has a very similar season to the one Daniel Jones had in 2022, then he's going to command the exact same contract that Daniel Jones got in 2022. So that, I think, is the big deterrent for the Giants, for every team involved here that was maybe considering the Justin Fields trade. No one wanted to give him a starting job because nobody wanted him to find the flash in the pan, have a good season, and then have to get paid. I think more than anything, teams would have rather not have good quarterback play than have good quarterback play from Justin Fields in a contract year. That's honestly where I think it stands. They wouldn't want to see this player get paid all this money 1 year after he has just a decent season, just like Daniel Jones. It's a scary situation because look at the situation that the Giants are in. I mean, they just wasted $160 million on Daniel Jones, essentially. So you don't want to have to do that all over again with Justin Fields. So I don't think that the Giants ever should have been considering a deal for Justin Fields just because of that situation alone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an interesting way to look at it, because for the Giants, they could, if they will play the game, they made that move. You could be putting yourself right in that spot you just were a couple of years ago with Daniel Jones. And I would think that Joe Shane and Brian Dable would want to hitch their wagon to like their own guy that they could pick and develop that way, rather than taking someone else's reclamation project. And that's not to say like Justin Fields doesn't have talent. He does, obviously. That's the reason why he was a top half of the first round pick a few years ago. He's flashed the talent over the course of the 3 years. For him, it's just been consistency. And who knows, maybe like Steelers probably a better spot for him, because they're paying, Russell Wilson pennies on the dollar to be their starting quarterback this year. And if, he comes out and doesn't play well, then you turn it over to Fields and see if you have anything there. And you could probably, for them, be looking to draft a quarterback next year if things go poorly. So I do think it was a better situation for him to end up in Pittsburgh. And just where the Giants are, I don't know. I just didn't see their GM taking that chance on someone else's guy that was drafted, rather than, just taking their own quarterback they believe in this year.
No, I agree with you. I think if anything, the Giants are going to be aggressive and try to find a quarterback in the first round of this year's draft. It might not work out, but even still, a guy like Justin Fields, and for the record, I'm a big Justin Fields fan. Like, I think he is a good player. I think he arguably could have been an upgrade over Daniel Jones for the 2024 season. But that's also because I'm not a Daniel Jones fan. So you could take that both ways. But I like Justin Fields. I think he's shown a lot of talent, flashed a lot during his time in Chicago, but he does need a new change of scenery. And he probably does need a situation where it's kind of like Geno Smith, where, maybe there was talent that was flashed here and there, not ready to be a full-time starter, needs to sit for a little while, come back in the future. Maybe he could be a starter one day once again. I think that's possible for Justin Fields. And I do think that playing in a situation where you have Russell Wilson, experienced veteran, Hall of Famer that you could talk to, learn from, and also just be in a good environment in Pittsburgh, I think this is actually the best situation that Justin Fields could have gotten out of this whole ordeal. And then for the Giants, I just think it's quarterback or bust in the draft. If you don't get the quarterback in the draft, then I think you're going to have to stockpile picks for the 2025 NFL draft, and hopefully you can land the top quarterback in that class. But even then, easier said than done. So the Giants are obviously in a tricky situation at quarterback, but Justin Fields by no means was going to be the solution to that problem.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And like you said, like maybe in the short term, immediate upgrade over Daniel Jones. Yeah, you could probably make that case for 2024. But then where does that get you? Because then again, like you said, you're kind of just putting yourself right back into that spot you were a year ago. So I didn't see it for the Giants. I'm kind of glad that they didn't make that trade. If anything, they should probably be looking to get aggressive and maybe try to move up. Although I think other teams are trying to do the same thing. You want to get into that next with a more recent move that might impact the Giants in the draft here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the Minnesota Vikings make a trade to get another first round pick. Now they have 2 picks in the first round, including, where are they now? 11? No. Yes, 11. Yeah, pick a number 11. And with the trade, they also have pick number 23. To me, this absolutely screams they are going to make an aggressive play for a quarterback. Something tells me they are not comfortable going into 2024 with just Sam Darnold as their quarterback. So that also would then obviously have a factor in the Giants, or on the Giants, who are picking 6th overall. And as we just discussed, could very well be looking for their own quarterback.
Yeah, the fear for Giants fans is, or at least Giants fans who do want to draft a quarterback. There are still fans who don't want to draft a quarterback, who don't see the value and think that Daniel Jones can bounce back in year 6. We'll see about that. But for the Giants fans who do want to draft a quarterback, there is a fear that now the Minnesota Vikings are positioning themselves to move in front of the Giants and prevent that from happening. And I think that it's a reasonable fear, because when you're looking at it, those picks 4 and 5 right in front of the Giants, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Los Angeles Chargers, no matter how you look at it, I think that they can get a tremendous amount of value from trading down. There are so many benefits. Both of those teams have so many holes on their roster. they need to add more talent across the board. Trading down with the Minnesota Vikings makes a lot of sense for both of those teams. But then there's the other way that you can look at it, where maybe JJ McCarthy is on the board at 6 and the Giants are not convinced and they don't want JJ McCarthy and they don't think that he's worthy of the 6th overall pick. Then maybe they call the Minnesota Vikings and say, hey, do you want JJ McCarthy? Then they trade down with the Vikings. So they could go one of two ways. Either the Giants are going to try and get their quarterback, and now they're in a pretty steep bidding war with the Minnesota Vikings to move up for the quarterback, or they could leverage the situation with the Vikings, trade down with them, and let the Vikings take their quarterback while they address other positions of need. I would assume that the Giants could pull a 2025 first-round pick out of this deal too. I think it's probably the pick 11, pick 23, and probably a 2025 first from Minnesota. So if you could do that, then you do have to consider it because you're adding a tremendous amount of talent for the future. And then again, like I was saying, if the Giants can't get their quarterback this offseason and they need to do it next offseason, not even talking about drafting one next offseason, but even having the extra first-round pick so that if someone becomes available on the trade market, similar to when Matt Stafford became available a couple years ago, the Giants do need to consider all of their options this offseason and next offseason to find a franchise quarterback. And stockpiling extra first-round picks, it's one way to do it. It could be a helpful way to do it. So it's something that they should definitely consider if the Vikings want to get into the 6th pick. But I think more realistically, the Vikings are going to try and get into the top 4, and that's going to thwart the Giants from probably getting their quarterback.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think they're going to try to jump in front of where the Giants are currently picking, which is obviously the 6th pick, and Arizona could, be the spot. Even the Chargers at 5. I feel like the Chargers have so many needs that like they're a team that I think could maybe move out and just any one of those spots in front. That's the team they got to get in front of, unfortunately, is the Giants. And then that creates a little bit of a headache or maybe change of plans for New York in that spot. I think probably fair to guess the top 3 teams, I think, stick and pick quarterback, right? Like obviously Chicago, they move on from Justin Fields. They're going quarterback. Washington, I think they're going quarterback. And New England, I know they've kind of done the dance a little bit. Will they, won't they? But I feel like they're going to stick and go quarterback too. What's your take on those top 3?
I think Washington, no matter what, they're taking a quarterback. That's for sure. Chicago, no matter what, they're taking a quarterback. It's number 3 is where the draft starts. What happens with the New England Patriots? Do they trade down or don't they? And I think that there is a world that exists where maybe they try to trade down, but I don't think they're going to want to trade down with Minnesota. Going from 3 to 11 is a pretty steep drop off. But with the Giants at 6, if they want to trade down, moving down 3 spots, still landing an elite receiver, maybe adding a future 2nd round pick, that makes more sense to me for the New England Patriots, just because that fall off from 3 to 11 is pretty steep. But then again, maybe going to 11 from there and getting a future 1st round pick could be enticing for the Patriots. I'm not really sure what the Patriots are planning. I think it's going to be kind of tough to figure them out. And I don't think we're going to have a clear-cut answer until the day of the draft. But if I had to lean one way or another, they probably are going to take a quarterback at number 3. I would assume it's going to be Drake May. It sounds like Jaden Daniels is going to be the guy for Washington. So I would assume that Drake May at 3 to New England, and then number 4 overall, I think it's almost certainly going to get traded to the Minnesota Vikings in that scenario. If quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, I think the Vikings are going to move into number 4 and try everything they can to get a quarterback there. The only way that the Giants could prevent that from happening, though, is if they're willing to move up from 6 to 4, and then the fan base is going to be up in arms and have an absolute riot because half of them don't think JJ McCarthy is worth a top 6 pick, let alone a top 4 pick, plus the extra draft capital to get him. So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how the Giants actually attack this. I think that they are going to call the top 3 teams, especially number 3 at New England, to try and move in for Drake May. But if that's not possible, I feel like the Giants at the end of the day are probably just going to have to stick at 6. The Vikings are going to jump them, take JJ McCarthy, and the Giants are still going to land an explosive and elite wide receiver talent. So there's only so much complaining you can do in that scenario.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, I know JJ McCarthy is someone that you've been coming around on as a prospect, especially if, under the hands of Brian Dable and Joe Shane and just the rest of the Giants staff and, being able to develop there. But I guess if let's say the scenario plays out how we think, where the Minnesota Vikings trade up in front of the Giants and they take a quarterback and 4 quarterbacks go off the board before the Giants are picking. Are you just going is Malik Neighbors the pick? Are you sticking there? Are you trying to move out of it? What would your pivot be if 4 quarterbacks go before the Giants pick?
I think it's stick and pick. Like at that point, you're getting one of the two, either Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors. I guess there's a world where, the Chargers shock everybody and they take Malik Neighbors over Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't think it's that far fetched, but I would assume it would be Marvin Harrison Jr. goes at number 5, and then the Giants land Malik Neighbors. And listen, the amount of benefits that could have on the Giants offense is like unbelievable, because they haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver since 2018. That's a long time. Like, we're talking OBJ is the last 1,000-yard receiver for the Giants. That was a long time ago. Odell Beckham Jr. has played for like 4 different teams since then. So you got to think about it, put it in the perspective. The Giants do need an elite wide receiver, and it's been a long time for them. So taking a guy like a Malik Neighbors, again, it's not something you can really complain about. As badly as I want the Giants to get a quarterback, if they can land an elite wide receiver talent who can potentially put up 1,000 receiving yards in his rookie season, you have to be happy about it. I wouldn't get cute here if I'm the Giants. I wouldn't trade down from that. You've got a blue chip prospect on the board. You got to take the blue chip prospect. If they do trade down, it'll be interesting because maybe they add a receiver at the end of the first round, maybe a future first round pick that they could use for quarterback. Okay, that conversation can be had. But me personally, if I'm the Giants, blue chip prospects on the board at 6, I'm taking one. It kind of reminds me of 2021 NFL draft that they were picking, I believe, 10th. And 11th. They were picking 11th. They traded down with the Bears. They took Kadarius Toney at the end of the first round, and they let Micah Parsons go to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, my coverage on Fireside Giants and everything leading up to that draft was, if Micah Parsons is on the board, you sprint to the podium. You don't consider trading down. You just take him. They didn't. They traded down. Years later, they wish that they took Micah Parsons. Now he's one of the best defensive players at the NFL for the Cowboys. So that's kind of the situation that I think the Giants are in again this year. If they are picking 6 and they have one of those blue chip prospects on the board, don't get cute and trade down and accumulate extra picks. Just take the blue chip prospects, whether you're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors. They're both tremendous players that'll transform the Giants offense. So they got to be the pick there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like the allure of trading down sometimes, I think, is better than just like the actual result, because I feel like too many times teams try to get a little bit too cute. They move back, and like that scenario you just described with the Giants is a great one, because obviously, they were there at 11. The Bears wanted to move up and grab the quarterback, the whole thing. But you also sent a guy like Micah Parsons to a division rival, and then you drafted a psychopath in Kadarius Toney, which didn't work out, unfortunately. So that's a tough one. But if I'm the Giants, I'm with you. I think I agree. I think you just stay there and take the best player available. I do have a potential. I guess the chat has a potential fix for the Giants quarterback plans, if you want to hear it. Johnny says, what about Zach Wilson for a 5th? Can I get you to bite? I've been trying on almost every episode. Giants biting for Zach Wilson for a 5th round pick.
No. Okay. Simply put, just no. And listen, I'm actually one of those people that thinks Zach Wilson has some talent. I think that he could have had success in this league if things shaped out differently with the Jets and the environment that he was put into there. But going over to the New York Giants, which honestly, it's kind of tough to say, but they might be an even messier show than the Jets right now. I mean, obviously the Jets have their fair share of controversial storylines every single week, but the Giants do too. And the Giants have honestly been so ugly for so long. Putting Zach Wilson from one ugly New York situation to the other where the media can just continue to rip into him, absolutely not. The Giants don't need him anyway. And again, even though I might be higher on Zach Wilson than some fans are, this is something that I would actually hate. It would pain me to see this happen.
His follow-up is we could throw in a case of White Castle burgers. I think that might make it worse. I don't know what your take on White Castle is, but if you're looking for a stomach ache, have yourself some White Castle.
Yeah, I'm not a big White Castle guy. I'll have to pass on that one as well, unfortunately.
Can't say that I blame you on that one. So, all right. So Minnesota Vikings, their trade obviously has a big impact on the Giants. Back to the Jets here, as they are hosting Mike Williams for a visit. He is meeting with the Jets today. He is also scheduled to meet later this week with the Panthers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Your thoughts on the Jets potentially taking a flyer on Mike Williams?
I think it's the perfect move for this team. Listen, again, adds more flexibility to you going into the NFL draft. So now, if you want to trade down, you don't need to go ahead and take the best prospect available at the wide receiver spot. Maybe you could trade down to take the second or third best available to you. So I think Mike Williams, listen, the injury is a concern for sure. He hasn't been healthy, but he's still very talented. He's a former first-round pick, and I think that this receiving core, it's not necessarily looking for a WR1 anyway, right? You have Garrett Wilson. Now you need a good complementary piece, and I think that's where Mike Williams plays best now. And obviously, that's what he's been doing with the Chargers. Keenan Allen was their primary receiving threat. Mike Williams, their secondary receiving threat. But also, he adds an element of vertical passing attack. He's a great deep threat. He's got speed. We'll see how much speed he still has coming off of this injury. I'm sure there's going to be some rust there. But if he's back at full strength, Mike Williams has always been a fast, physical receiver, can make some contested catches for you. Honestly, the perfect player for Aaron Rodgers in my mind. You know, one of those guys that can just run the 9 down the sideline, and Rodgers hits him with a nice back shoulder fade. That's what I would see with Mike Williams. So I like it. I think this would be a good move. We'll see if it happens. I know he's going to have visits with a few teams, but the Jets should definitely be heavily pursuing Mike Williams, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really like him, and I'm kind of a sucker for those big receivers who can go up and get the football. Maybe it's just because I've seen the Jets in the red zone be historically bad like the last 3 years. So give me the guy who could go up, catch the football, make some big plays, especially down the field too. Having a more vertical offense with Aaron Rodgers is something that would excite me. Now, unfortunately for Williams, like he was cut, and part of it was because of a cap casualty, but there is some concerns with him, and it's his injury. He only played 3 games last year. He's coming off an ACL. Now, I think the potential not benefit, but it's not like he tore his ACL in week like 16 and his recovery might push into the start of the season. It happened in September. So I think he's had a nice amount of time here to recover, but injuries are a part of his game. He has missed some time in this league, but you mentioned he's been a number 2 his entire career, which I think is important. Like, you don't necessarily want the guy who's used to being the number 1 and then is going to complain if he's not getting as many targets as, that satisfies him. But one of the more productive wide receiver twos, he's had 2 1,000-yard seasons. He had 895 yards in 13 games in 2022. I think assuming health, I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I agree with you. And listen, even if health isn't perfect, right? Because it was a September injury, he's probably going to miss a lot of training camp and other stuff. You do know that once he gets healthy towards the second half of the season, when the Jets are hopefully making that playoff push and contending, that's when he gets to full strength. And that's when he starts catching those touchdowns on those back shoulder fades from Aaron Rodgers. So I think that it makes sense, even if you're looking at it as, yeah, he might be a little underwhelming in the first quarter of the season, but this is more of a signing that we want to make to position us in January rather than September. So that's what I would see the value of a Mike Williams deal, knowing that you can have another great pass catcher once it turns into playoff time, and you need a stable of really good receivers. Like, that's where, when you're looking at the NFL this past playoffs, I mean, a lot of 1,000-yard receivers. I think only 1 or 2 of the teams in the postseason didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver, and there was a lot of good receiver talent, and it took teams really far. And so when you're going into that playoff season and you're the Jets, I mean, having a guy like Mike Williams, a dependable number 2, maybe he wasn't all that great in the beginning of the season, still knocking off the rust from his injury. But once you get to playoff time, that's where you know he's going to make his impact. And that's what you really want from the signing in the first place.
Yeah, no, exactly. And as we kind of said already too, but Mike Williams doesn't stop you from potentially adding another wide receiver in the draft. Like, might be semi unrealistic because of just the teams in front. But as we described just a few minutes ago, if 4 quarterbacks are going, like, what if Rome Odunze is there at pick 10 for the Jets, and then your starting wide receiver trio is Rome Odunze, Mike Williams, and Garrett Wilson? Like, holy crap, did you just like revamp that room completely in one off season? So the Jets needed multiple bodies, and still will, even if they add Mike Williams at the wide receiver spot. But I like how his skill set would complement Garrett, and then it doesn't necessarily stop you from going weapon in the first round. Even like, yes, technically Brock Bowers is tight end, but he can line up in the slot. They could line him up outside, a versatile piece. So I'm with it. I think he's worth the risk that comes with it, with the injuries. There's been some rumblings too. Our friend of the program, Pretty Ricky, the insider of Big Apple Blitz, seems to think that the Jets are going to do everything they can to make sure he doesn't leave the building. So we need him to come through again for us.
Sweet. Yeah, Pretty Ricky was dead on about a lot of the deals that happened over the weekend and really through the start of free agency. I think that his account got nuked, though. I don't think he's available on Twitter anymore, which is really unfortunate. Hopefully he makes his long-awaited return soon and can drop some more information for us. But Mike Williams, Jets, I think it's a good deal. And I like what you said there with, of course, it doesn't prevent them from taking a wide receiver in the first round anyway, but it does kind of spark this thought in my head that I want to ask you, Matt, where so they've addressed a lot of their needs on the offensive line. If they go ahead and they sign Mike Williams, they've addressed that too. What are this team's biggest positions of need in the first round of the draft if they do make those moves? Like, because, and I'm asking this to say, if you've got Mike Williams in there and you've got, all these offensive linemen that you just signed, maybe now it's about trading down and just accumulating more picks and filling out the depth on this roster. I think that might end up becoming the most enticing option for the Jets, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100%. I would be totally in on them moving down, especially because they don't have a second round pick. And then you could still, like, let's say you move back, I don't know, five to 7 spots. You could get a quality tackle or receiver there. And like we said at the top, if you drafted an offensive lineman in the first round, they're going to play. Someone's going to get banged up. Smith misses time every year. Morgan Moses is 33 years old. Neither one of those guys are long-term answers, but you could also add a wide receiver. And I think in particular, like those two positional groups, offensive line and wide receiver, you're going to find guys in the second round who have starting potential and are like really, really talented, players and prospects. So moving back might be, as you said, might be your best bet now, because you don't go from, okay, yeah, you get someone in the top 10, but then you don't pick again until pick 72. Now it's okay, maybe you slide back 7 spots, but you're picking at 17, 48, and 72 and have a chance to add more depth at those positions you were weaker at wide receiver and the offensive line. And then from there, maybe it opens it up and you could take a defensive player at either on the interior of the defensive line or at safety in the third round. And you're not locked into like trying to fill like not necessarily starting caliber guys in the third round, but like really important depth pieces at key offensive needs. So I like the idea of a trade down a lot for the Jets.
Yeah, and I think that it is different from the Giants trade down scenario that we just discussed, where back in 2021, they had a blue chip player on the board that you just couldn't pass up. They did anyway, and it came back to bite them. I don't know if that would necessarily be the case for the Jets picking at 10 this year in this class, unless there's a guy like an Odunze who happens to fall. I guess the argument would be, can you pass up on a blue chip guy in a Brock Bowers? Some might consider him a blue chip guy, but honestly, because he's a tight end, you probably feel fine trading down anyway and foregoing the opportunity to take a blue chip tight end just because it's a tight end. So yeah, I think that trading down really does make a lot of sense for this Jets team if they end up landing a guy like Mike Williams. And I think just not having that second round pick is really tough in this year's class. Like, there is so much talent across the board, especially on the offensive side of the ball in this draft class. When you're talking offensive line, when you're talking wide receiver, having a second round pick would be super valuable for the Jets. So I would love the move if they did trade down from 10, just move back, 5 to 10 spots, and then there you go, extra second round pick. And now you can maybe address both offensive line and wide receiver with your first 2 picks, whereas before you were probably only addressing one of those 2 needs in the first round. So I think that it's a no-brainer for the Jets if they can make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just wanted to toss this back up from First State Jets, who says, no brainer, don't let Mike Williams leave. Really going to Carolina voluntarily, and then follows it up with, on a 1-year deal, boosted stats with Aaron, big payday next year. I think you kind of have to factor that in, which sounds crazy because like the Jets never have any offensive output at all, seemingly, especially at the quarterback spot. And like to compare it to the other teams he's supposed to meet with, Carolina, can they toss crazy money around? Yes, but there's still like major concerns with that offense and if Bryce Young's the guy or not. With the Pittsburgh Steelers, they could use some wide receiver help after moving on from Deontay Johnson, but Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, depending on who ends up playing more, like at this point in Russell Wilson's career, he's kind of locked in on his number 1 guy and not really like, he's not a guy who really spreads the ball around a ton. So is it weird to say? It feels weird saying it, but I don't think I'm wrong. Is the Jets maybe the best fit for him to get a 1-year deal and then cash in again if things go well?
I 100% think so. And it's playing with Aaron Rodgers is the main selling point here. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. The playing style that Mike Williams has, it's perfect for what Aaron Rodgers likes to do. I mean, how many times have we seen Aaron Rodgers throw those back shoulder fades and just take chunk yardage away from opposing defenses all throughout his career? It's the best throw that he makes. He's the best quarterback in the NFL making that throw. And Mike Williams, that's the best throw for him. Those are the receptions that he gets. That's where he really made his money in this NFL, was basically catching those back shoulder fades from good quarterbacks. And if you have Aaron Rodgers throwing those, I mean, that's the way to boost your stats if you're Mike Williams. And then again, like you said, cash in with a big payday next year. I think that's totally reasonable. I think that you would much rather play with Aaron Rodgers than, and I like Bryce Young, but you'd rather play with Aaron Rodgers than Bryce Young. And Bryce Young and all his question marks and everything going on in Carolina, that is not an attractive destination for anybody unless you're Robert Hunt, who just got handed $100 million from the Panthers. That's attractive. But the situation in Carolina is not attractive. Weird ownership, weird GM kind of maneuverability, and also just not a lot of talent across the board on that roster. So you'd rather go to the Jets, who do have a lot of talent across the board and do have a great quarterback who could throw you the ball. So Mike Williams to the Jets, I think it makes so much sense for both parties involved. And I really think it's a deal that should happen.
Yeah, I'm strangely pretty confident that something gets done this week. Maybe not necessarily today. Like maybe he still takes the visit with the Steelers and the Panthers, but I think Mike Williams to the Jets is something that gets done this week. Supposedly they're also going to be meeting with Jadeveon Clowney as well this week. So, we were upset last week, or I was at least, that Bryce Huff is no longer a Jet. Maybe fill in a guy who missed their 1-year deal, Jadeveon Clowney, in here. It could be a very active week for the Jets before we talk again on Thursday.
Yeah, it really could be. And it's kind of crunch time, right? Like we're going to see certain teams make moves like this, and it's just to position themselves for the draft. Like we said, the Jets are just giving themselves a lot of flexibility. And even a Clowney signing means, okay, maybe we don't need to address any type of pass rushing depth for the first few rounds. Maybe we can wait until day 3 to do that now. So it's all about adding that flexibility. The Giants added a couple of lowly offensive lineman depth pieces last week, not really anybody worth talking about, but still just adding that depth in there means that they don't need to take depth pieces on the offensive line once they get into the middle rounds of the draft, which is important. So opening up that flexibility, making it so that at any pick you're taking, you could take any player available. That's really important for both of these teams. And the Jets have done really a tremendous job of that. This has actually been such an impressive offseason, in my opinion, from Joe Douglas. I'm really impressed with all the moves that he's made and the way that he's positioned this team so perfectly for the draft. But the big thing is you got to nail the draft. You got to get those right picks, got to get those right players in there. That's what's going to be really important. But at least we know that the Jets are positioned well for the draft, and hopefully they make the right picks. And there you go. Now we're talking they could be a really good team with a couple of really good draft picks.
Absolutely. So before we go, any predictions, Jets Giants wise, before we talk next time on Thursday? Any feeling for what we're going to see this week from these teams?
I think we're going to see Mike Williams sign with the Jets. I think it makes too much sense for Mike Williams. It makes too much sense for the Jets. It makes too much sense for their draft plans. Everything involved here. It just sounds perfect. The more we talk about it, the more realistic it sounds, the more perfect it sounds. So I think Mike Williams to the Jets is going to happen this week. For the Giants, I don't think that anything's going to happen. I think they're going to pretty much just remain quiet here, maybe restructure some contracts. That's a possibility, but they're out of cap space for the most part. There's not too much that they can do. And I think that they're kind of just putting their heads down and getting ready for the draft.
Okay. I like it. I'm with you on Mike Williams. I'll even toss in the Jadeveon Clowney. That just feels like something that they would be in on. So I'll give you those two. And then maybe for an outside the box one, DJ Reed extension, free up $7.5 million by doing that. They could use, they could just restructure him, but why not extend him? I think he's been a really good Jet. Still young. It's not like he's a corner in his late 20s approaching 30. So that's one I'll tell you to look for. And then Giants wise, I agree. Not to be full boring here, but I just don't think they're going to do much this week. I think it'll be quiet for them.
Yeah, and it's not that we're boring. It's just that the Giants are in a boring spot here. I think that the restructure will happen of probably Andrew Thomas's contract. Not sure how notable that news is going to feel to everybody, but it is necessary now. I think that their cap space, I don't know if all of their contracts are actually on their books just yet, but by the time they get on the books, they're going to need to create more cap space. So they have to do something. The Andrew Thomas contract is probably going to end up getting restructured, which I'm comfortable with because we know he's not going anywhere. We want him here long-term anyway, so it's fine. Restructure that deal and then go forward and see where you can add talent in the future. But I don't even think the Giants have enough money to get their draft class under the books right now. So they're going to have to do something. But that could happen now. That could happen in April. I'm not really sure. But other than that, it's probably going to be a little bit slow for the Giants leading up to the draft.
Oh, okay. I was going to close, but we got a Giants hot take I want to get your opinion on. Giants signed Zeke.
Yeah, I like this. I think this is a good idea. The Giants obviously lose Saquon Barkley. They bring in Devin Singletary. He's going to be their lead back. They had some interest in A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon goes back to the Packers. And now who's RB2 on this team? I think Zeke makes sense. Short yardage situations where he's kind of just a power back for you, maybe third and short, goal line, those kind of pinch situations that you need a power back in there. I think that's where Zeke really plays well. And I thought that he did that well for the Patriots. And so now for the Giants, I mean, it would be kind of funny having Zeke on the Giants all these years later after, he tormented us while he was with Dallas for several seasons. But now adding him to this mix, the Giants need to go running back by committee. I think that their approach with Saquon Barkley the last couple of years was the wrong approach anyway. I think they still should have had a committee because the amount of carries that he was taking, there were some games where he had like 30 to 35 carries. It was absurd. Now we need to go running back by committee, especially if we want to be a ground and pound team and run the ball so much. It can't all just rest on the shoulders of Devin Singletary. You got to have situational running backs. You have to have a little bit of a group here, kind of like what the Giants had when they won those 2 Super Bowls against the Patriots. They had Fire and Ice. They had Ahmad Bradshaw, and they had Brandon Jacobs. And they even had DJ Ware for one of those rings as well. So they've always kind of had this running back by committee approach until Saquon Barkley got to town. I think it's time to get back to that committee approach, get in a few guys for specific game situations. Like Zeke will be your short yardage guy, Singletary, your first and second down guy. Now you also get a third down receiving back in there too. That's kind of the approach that I would take if I were the Giants here. So I like Zeke. He fits that specific role very well. And I still think that he's a pretty good player, even though he is getting up there in age. I think that would be a really good signing for the Giants.
I would love it for the Jets too, even. Like they still could use a veteran back in here. Like they have, obviously, Breece Hall is going to be the bell cow. Izzy, they just drafted in the 4th round last year, who's pretty explosive. But give me that guy, the veteran for short yardage situations down on the goal line. Good pass protector too. Like that, there's value in that too. So I think Zeke would be good for either one of these teams. But all right, that's going to do it for us on this episode. Let the people know where they can find your work, Anthony.
Follow me on Twitter at Anthony_Rivardo. Find me at Fireside Giants. That's our Giants podcast. And I've also got a solo YouTube channel. Just search up Anthony Rivardo and you'll find me there.
Love it. I'm Matt O'Leary, and why could follow along on all social media and on YouTube. Also Talking Jets, new episodes every Tuesday. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we will catch you next time.